Hey everyone, Greg Mescall here with you. Thanks for joining us. We continue our Why We Play series. Great conversation earlier today with members of Team USA that reached the podium for the first time in Betsy Armstrong, Terry Schroeder, and Brandon Brooks. And now we have a great conversation. Australian gold medalist in women's water polo, Liz Weeks. Now Liz Scott joining us. Liz, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me again.
So, yes, exactly. If you watched and in this pandemic, it may feel like this is the old movie Groundhog's Day where we're living the same life over and over again. We did talk to Liz a little while back as part of a look back at the 2000 Olympic Games. And I was joking with Liz before we started. She did such a good job explaining some of the history. We said, how do we get her back on here to dive into this more? Because Australia especially was so pivotal in getting water polo included at the Olympic level for women. We're going to get to all that, but Liz, I kind of want to start a little bit earlier than that, just to give our viewers and water polo fans a little context. So I know you joined the national team in '95. The Olympics come in 2000, but give us a sense of let's say in your younger years when you're a kid, where is water polo at for women in that time? Is it a viable option at the national team level, at the professional level? What do you remember as you're coming up as a kid?
Well, firstly, I remember being a kid in primary school and watching the Olympic Games. I think it must have been 76 or maybe it was the 80 Games. And I don't even remember seeing water polo, but I do remember thinking, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do. I would love to be an Olympian. Anyway, I just, forgot about that in the next few years. And then when I was in high school, my high school team needed a goalkeeper. So they just, I was a bit of an all-rounder at sport. And they just asked if I was interested in jumping in goal for them, and jumped in, loved it, and it took off from there. So that's when I was about 15. And almost immediately, because it is it was quite a close-knit community, you're in contact with people that were actually in the Australian team. So as a teenager coming up, I actually learned how to be a goalkeeper really from the Australian goalkeeper at the time. Karen Wade was her name. So you had contact with these Australian players through your club or your state. And it wasn't really until 1992, I remember watching so I think I must have been about 19. I remember watching the opening ceremony of the Barcelona Olympic Games. And I recognised some members of the Australian men's team stepping out in the opening ceremony. And that was actually when it really hit me. And I just thought, oh my gosh, why are the men there and not the women? You know, I knew some of these women, but they weren't competing at the Olympic Games, but the men were. And I remember really being quite depressed at that thought and thinking, oh my God, how can that be? You know, it's not 1950s or 60s, you know, this is 1992. And that was when it really hit me. So there were Australian opportunities to represent Australia, but for women, not in the Olympics. And I had the Australian squad on my radar at that time. I possibly had just made the Australian squad for the first time. I was trying to make the Australian squad as a late teen. And the unfairness of it all, it was just completely wrong. And I just remember thinking, you know, it's just so unfair being a girl and not having that opportunity to compete. And then it wasn't until sort of, I think I made the squad in 93 and then finally made the team in 95. And there had been a fight going on for a long time to get the sport into the Olympics, but that was just a pivotal moment for me in 92.
And as you're coming up and playing and getting that first chance, are the Olympics being talked about then, or is it a thing that that'd be nice, but that's not a thing that gets to happen for us?
Not so much maybe in 92, but definitely in the years that followed, definitely it was. I mean, I remember there were protests going on at the World Champs in Rome in 94. I'd missed out on selection for the team that year, but I went over to Rome just to watch. and there were girls wearing all the teams, and I'm not sure whose idea this was. There were all the girls wearing T-shirts saying Women Sydney 2000, and that was from all the teams. And I know particularly that an Australian, that the goalkeeper Karen Wade, her father had made a banner that just said Women Sydney 2000, and she would put it up on every venue that they went to, every pool, this massive banner. And so there was a movement then, definitely in 94, and there probably was earlier than that, but I can't really remember. So probably 94 is my earliest memory of the fight going on.
And I know you were watching a chat that we did a few weeks back with members of the U.S. women from 2000, one being Maureen O'Toole, who started her career with the U.S. in 1979. And she was talking about starting at 84, the LA games, that being a home games for Team USA. Everyone kept thinking, well, surely they'll put it in the U.S. in 84 where we have a good team. And then that didn't happen. And it was, well, of course it'll be 88. And then it was, well, it must be 92. And then they assumed another U.S. home game, 96. And so to your point, there was that want for inclusion, but it just took a very long time, as you know well. And then and you were kind enough to share some of the notes and memories of the former Australian team manager Pat Jones, but this groundswell support that really builds in the mid 90s. It seemed like as you came onto the scene, the intensity to get water polo included really ramped up, and the efforts to do it got maybe a bit more serious. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. So I was in the right place at the right time in Sydney, and it was a wonderful place to be for water polo, really, because it was going to be the games of the new millennium, the year 2000. So to still be there and talking about gender equality at that time, it was sort of getting to the point where people just had to do something about it. It was just ridiculous. It wasn't 1950 or 1960s. We shouldn't have had to fight for it in the 90s. And it was just in Sydney. And I think also, like you mentioned before, Pat Jones, the old manager of the Australian team, she lived in Sydney. We had all these wonderful opportunities to fight for the cause because we had access to all the officials that were in charge. So yeah, the momentum just really built. And there were lots of women there in the background that were just, had been fighting for so long. And the momentum did build. And then with the Olympics being in Sydney, it was just wonderful timing.
When you think back to your involvement as you get from 95 and going closer to Sydney, is there any worry of I should just, and thinking of maybe thoughts you might be having, but is there any thought, well, I should just be worried about making this team and just playing water polo, and I don't want to rock the boat, so to speak, to go too far into this drive to get something that, look, we all agree, right, to your point, it shouldn't have been even up for debate in the 90s. But I mean, even as we're seeing today, right, change is a painful process for people that don't want it to happen, right? So was that a concern of yours? Like, this is a little bit of a ledge I'm going out on.
It was. It absolutely was. Thankfully, I was a little bit of a rebel, and I had great support behind me. My family was wonderful, and I had Pat on my side. I had Pat in the background. And Pat had been a bit of a rebel herself in fighting for our cause. And water polo at the time, all the officials that controlled the numbers at the games and the FINA officials, it was all men. So, and being a new member and also in Australian water polo, it was mainly men on the board and surrounded by male coaches and things. And I was a new member in the team, and I was really worried about losing my spot in the team. And in fact, I know a lot of my teammates were as well. And hence why not many of us turned up on that day to sort of help gate crash this press conference. So yeah, I was really, really worried, but I also had a dream. I also had a dream, and I had to throw everything at it. And there's this great saying that my husband and I really love, and it's, if not now, then when? If not you, then who? I don't know if that's it exactly, but it was just something I guess I lived by at the time, and so nervous, so worried about the consequences, but also I didn't want any what ifs. I didn't want the Sydney Games to come around and I'd be sitting there watching the men again on TV going, well, what if we'd done this? Or what if we tried that? I just didn't want any what ifs, and it was worth that risk of being kicked out of the team or whatever.
Reading over some of Pat's notes as well, I think, and this is an important thing to remind people of, is that the group that was pushing the Olympics to get included really kind of wanted to remind people this was not a new sport, right? So you hear a lot of talk now about new sports. We just had a great conversation yesterday on our Facebook page about sports that are new to the Olympics in Tokyo, such as surfing and climbing, and others that want to get in going forward, like a dodgeball or break-in, formerly breakdancing. But water polo was already in. It's one of the oldest Olympic sports of all time. I know at one point, the thought of gender equity was, well, the men have water polo and the women have synchronized swimming, or now artistic swimming. But I'm curious, in your memory, how pivotal was it to kind of develop that why of why we're doing this, and to really inform people that this was not a new thing, but it was one of, in fact, the oldest sports, and we're just looking for an equal chance?
Well, it's extremely important. I mean, at the Olympics, it's a numbers game. There's only a certain number of athletes that can fit into the Olympic Village, and that's what it had come down to. So the numbers had already been set. There had been some new sports added, and yeah, we just needed people to know that it wasn't a new sport. It was the oldest team sport in the Olympic Games, and it was going to be the year 2000. Why on earth were the women not there alongside the men? Like, it just did not make sense. So that was actually a really good selling point. And actually, since the game, some really good things have come out of that. And when they do add the new sports now, they absolutely, only sports will be added if there's men and women's. And I mean, rugby sevens is a great example of that. Rio, the rugby sevens got included in the games. And for Australian women, that was fantastic because we went on to win that gold medal as well. So some wonderful things did come out of it, but it was just really important to let the public know that it wasn't a new sport. We'd done all the right things and we needed to be there alongside the men. And why wouldn't we be?
You alluded to a meeting or a press conference that water polo athletes crashed, and there were multiple kind of moments where those that wanted to see water polo added to the Olympic program tried to make contact, right, with decision makers, whether it's we're going to show up to a meeting, we're going to try and deliver some materials to an office. And I know that you weren't always at those specific moments, but as part of the movement, what were those moments like where that's not really in the playbook, right? That's not, the way that they might advise how you would get something added, right? There's not a bullet point in the application process for a new sport that says you got to twist some arms and show up some places that you might not be wanted. What were those moments like?
Okay, so they were pretty, yeah, you're right. There is no rule book. And I think it just goes back again to having some women that are really willing to have a crack and to be a bit of a rebel, and some really clever women. So Pat was really clever, and she'd managed the Australian team for quite a few years. Her husband had been the president of Australian water polo. And she retired in 94, but then her husband was still the president. So she didn't want to sort of do too much to embarrass him or upset him. So when he finally retired in 96, Pat went into full rebel mode. She was like, right, games are going to be in Sydney. This is it. It's now or never. So she was always lobbying politicians, lobbying FINA officials. And actually in 1995, when I didn't know this at the time, but that was my first year in the team. It was a World Cup in Sydney. We went on to win that. Pat was there in the background, whining and dining all these FINA officials, you know, trying to sweet talk them into doing the right thing, speaking up for them, adding us into the games. And she really thought they would for 96. She thought, oh, you know, we've won them over. We've put them up in lovely hotels. And she really thought 96, Atlanta, we're going to get this in. And obviously we didn't. You know, FINA officials were all just smile and grin and say yes, yes, and then do absolutely nothing. So then Pat went on, and she was really clever, and she let all these officials know that we weren't going to go away, and she had a plan. And part of that plan was organising the meeting at the airport where Mustafa Lafoury, the president of FINA, was flying in. So she got me to get all the girls together and go and try to meet him that day and make a bit of noise. She had a plan to get us in the media, get us on TV so that the public knew what was going on. And yeah, there is no rule book, but I think it's a wonderful example of women supporting women. Pat had this incredible report, SBS reporter, that really loved our story and loved helping to fight for gender equity in the sport. And so she was feeding Pat information on where and when all these officials were going to be. And you just had to take a chance, I think. You just had to have a crack, have a belief in yourself that it was going to make a difference. And I think you just need to stand up for what you believe in and keep fighting. And yeah, be a bit of a rebel, I think, is probably the way to go.
Yeah, that seems to be a theme that we're coming back to here, is that you know, sometimes you need a rebel with a cause, and it was getting women's water polo included in the Olympic Games. We're talking with Liz Weeks, a member of the Australian women's water polo team from 2000 that won gold in Sydney, about that journey to get water polo onto the Olympic program. Now, I know from the story 1997, it seems as if this is going to get approved, and then it doesn't happen initially, and then it does by the end of the year. That feels like a roller coaster of emotions, where you think things are going in the right direction, then they're not, then they do. What's your memory of that time?
Yeah, it was a real roller coaster, and you know, you feel there's hope, and then you hear some news that it's not, and then back in. But I mean, it's a roller coaster that ended on a high. So it was a pretty good year, 1997.
And so, how do you describe when the news is now confirmed and official? Were you at a practice? Was the team together? When does it come down that it's a done deal, there'll be water polo in the Olympics?
I think we got the call. We were at training, and they said, oh, can you girls come into town at certain place, certain time? We've got some news. So we thought there's no way they're going to get us together if it's not in. So there was only sort of 4 or 5 of us training in Sydney at the time that were in the team. So we went into town, and there was media there. And I just remember looking at these girls that were my teammates, and it was just a wonderful moment. And I think we finished up at the pub that night in celebration.
That is
true water polo style.
Exactly. What did you hear, if anything? You know, it's a different era, right? The internet, not as widespread, cell phones and everything. But what if anything, were you hearing from your peers in other countries, where, as far as other water polo nations? I imagine everyone equally excited, but was there a sense of kind of the debt of gratitude owed to Australia for the work that you all did?
Oh, I don't think we really heard that at that time. I mean, women all over the world had been fighting for years for inclusion. They'd been fighting in Europe and in Canada and the US. And I remember being in France at a World Cup, and we all, you know, posed with just our cozy bottoms on, with riding on our backs saying, you know, women's Sydney 2000. So it'd been going on all around the world for a long time. I think it was just unique. We just had those opportunities in Sydney, and we're in the right place at the right time and willing to do something about it. But since then, yes, definitely other countries have expressed gratitude, and probably more so Pat would have heard that. But it just was such a massive team effort, and so many women behind the scenes for so many years, that, you know, you can't take all the credit. Although I'd probably say Pat Jones can take all the credit.
Sure. No, the work put in there is, not to be discounted in any way. And so we talked a bit about this when you were on last time, but and this was a similar, I think, experience for women all around the globe that played water polo, where it was one thing to get the opportunity, but now you had to go and make the team, or now you had to go and try and be successful. And we talked a bit about this last time as well, but you have some time between knowing that the sport will be in the Olympics and now proving that you belong on that team. Was that something of a concern of yours, to really make sure that you fought so hard for this? Now I need to make sure I get there, and then we execute.
Absolutely it was. I mean, but it's like, you know, we'd fought that battle, and I think it just makes you so much stronger to continue on for the next one, and making the team was that next one, and, you know, trying to do all the right thing and not get injured. I mean, that was the biggest worrying that, oh my God, what if you get injured? That for me, I was so worried about. But also, yeah, making the team. And then once you made the team, then it doesn't stop there. You know, you're at the Olympics and you want to be the goalie in the water, not the one on the bench. And then again, it's another battle, and you're trying to play your best, but then with that pressure and the whole enormity of the situation, it was just never ending.
And I can only imagine the excitement in general around a home Olympic Games, let alone one that was allowing women's water polo to debut for the first time. So are you just dealing with lots of friends and family reaching out? I'm sure media were all about it. Tough to kind of block that stuff out and focus on the water polo? How did you handle both?
Yeah, probably not well. Yeah, not well. It was just, I felt like I'd been hit by a train. Like it was that hard. And even now I have dreams where I'm playing again and I'm at the Olympics, and I wake up and I think, oh my God, thank God I'm not there anymore. It was that hard. I mean, it was that wonderful too, don't get me wrong, but I have these dreams where it's just so stressful trying to deal with all that. And then when I wake up, it's such a relief, a bit like the relief when it was over. You know, it was such a massive relief when it was over, that we'd actually done it, because yeah, we'd talked the talk, and, you know, walking the walk's another step up from that. But I think the beauty of it is there was, you know, 12 girls beside me and a team behind us. And so there's just something so powerful about being in a team, and just knowing that they've all got your backs and you've got their backs. I mean, I don't think anything beats that feeling.
You mentioned having dreams, and it's been 20 years later, and I'm wondering, was it, and not to make any of us feel old, but was it because, or do those still come up because it's something that you loved so much, something you worked so hard at? What do you think is it about 2000 and that journey that still has you dreaming about it today?
I don't really know, but maybe it's, I loved the game. I loved the journey. I loved how hard it was. I loved getting up at 5 a.m. and seeing the sunrises, and I loved the camaraderie. I love that feeling of being so fit and on top of the world. And I do miss that. I do miss all of those things. So it could be part of that. You know, you are wanting to go back to that, but it is also extremely stressful. There's so much pressure. I mean, even now, I remember when I retired and my mum said, "Oh, thank God you've retired, Elizabeth." She said, she just couldn't cope with it. I mean, I think there were instances there during that final where mum had to leave, like mum had to walk out. She just couldn't watch. And I I see that on a much smaller level now when my kids are playing, you know, like it's so stressful. So I get that. But I'd say it's probably a bit of both. You know, I definitely miss it, all those great things about it, but I don't miss that pressure. And yeah, possibly that's where it revisits me in my dreams.
Last time we talked, you told us about going into that gold medal game against the U.S., which for those that are not familiar, it's this wild finish. Australia wins the very last second in the first Olympic gold medal game for women's water polo. But I remember you telling us that you just knew, you just had a sense that this was your day, that you were going to win that game. And I after we talked, I couldn't help but think you couldn't really write it better. I mean, it is such a storybook ending for Australian water polo. Did it dawn on you and the group? I mean, you really couldn't have put it together better for it to time up just the way that it did.
No, it's an absolute fairy tale. And it's funny talking to Yvette Higgins, who scored that winning goal. Yeah, I was just talking to her the other day, and she also felt that way that morning. So when we were walking around the village together in the morning, and I felt that way, but she did too. And the coach actually, our beautiful coach Isfan, he actually pulled her aside and he said, Yvette, I'm not going to start you in the water. He said, because I want the US to forget about you and just be patient. You're going to score the winning goal. So that is what she reminded me of. That's what he said to her, which is pretty phenomenal. There was a kick out, right, like you said, with 1 second left to go. And it's exactly what happened. They did forget about her, and Yvette's a left-hander. So everyone was marking up, except Yvette was free because it was an extra. But you don't let Yvette Higgins sit out there in her favourite position and have a free shot at goal. And it's exactly what happened. I mean, it was a beautiful pass too that went to Yvette, but it was an absolute fairy tale. And even now, I just can't actually believe that it's happened. And it's such a relief when I feel that, yep, that actually did. That memory's tucked away safely, and no one can take that away from us. It was a fairy tale. I mean, everyone I ever knew was in that audience or saw that game from somewhere. My primary school teacher, my third cousin, the local butcher, just everyone. And I think that's what's so special about having a home games. My dad was a volunteer. He drove the bus for the US team. And so he got to know all of them as well. So it was just such a really personal experience having it in your hometown.
It's interesting, all this time later, it still feels almost a little like disbelief, right? And then you can kind of go back and say, well, I do have a medal. I can look at videos or photos. Because I was wondering, when you're on the podium and they give you the medal, I can only imagine, I just know from talking to other Olympians, it's a very emotional moment for many of them. But is all of that, is the whole journey wash over you in that moment? Or is it very specifically just that game and just the madness that was that final 1 second? What's rolling through your head if you can think back, not to mention you're in front of 17,000 people?
Oh no, that crowd, I can still feel it reverberating through my body when I think about it. But no, it wasn't so much the journey in that moment. It was just that moment. It was the crowd. It was the noise. It was the look on my teammates' faces. It was holding their hands as we stepped up onto the podium. And Yvette actually tripped up. I remember holding her hand, and she's tripped up onto the podium. And just looking up into that crowd and seeing my family's faces all painted in the green and gold, and just the noise, the joy, the relief, and then singing the national anthem. It's just it's an absolute dream.
Another thing that we talked about last time, and the idea of you achieve this ultimate sporting goal, which is winning the championship, winning the gold medal. But the impact of the fight that you took part in lasts much longer than 2000, or will last much longer after we're all gone, right? So, and I know at the time you had said, well, as much as I love winning the gold medal, the fight to include this sport means more. Was that a conclusion you came to quickly, or has time and age given you that perspective?
Definitely time and age. For a while there, I retired and didn't have much to do with water polo. I got married, had kids, and then it was probably either the 2004 Olympics or more so probably the 2008. And I remember watching and feeling like there was a little bit of me in that water, and that I played a small role in allowing those women to play, and then that all the women that came before me that played a role. So, and even now, just when I see the girls play, I feel like it's really special. I do feel like I'm in that water with them, and then the ongoing opportunities that all little girls all around the world have to now. They can now dream about going to the Olympics, and that dream can become a reality because of some of the great stuff that we did in the past. So definitely it was a perspective that came on with age.
And then within your home country, and whether it's Perth or Sydney or anywhere in Australia, in the last 20 years, what has your team, where does it kind of live in the social consciousness? I mean, I know people obviously know you were gold medalists, that you helped to get water polo involved in the Olympics, but is that group held somewhere special, whether it's in the aquatics world within Australia or within the sporting community in general? How do people think of the Sydney 2000 team?
Well, they're very special in my heart. All my beautiful teammates. I think it's a moment that's often talked about a lot. Just last night there was a 2000 sort of towards Tokyo /2000 walk down memory lane. It was we were featured on that, and Yvette Higgins was featured on that. So it is one of those really special moments that is treasured, I think, in Australian Olympic, definitely in Australian Olympic history, but also now when I meet people, even to this day, and they say, oh, I remember that goal. And I mean, water polo is not a high profile sport. And generally, you know, if people are going to go to the Olympics, they'll go and watch the basketball or the athletics or the swimming. So it's not your high profile sport, but the number of people that remember that game and that story, it's quite incredible. And I think it is held in a lot of people's hearts within Australia and the sporting community, but not just the sporting community. People that you know would never think, not really into sport, but they remember where they were when Yvette scored that goal. And I think actually having to fight to get the sport into the Olympic Games actually helped with people's memories of the final moment, because every time we're in the water, they talked about it. You know, they talked about this is the first Olympics. And so I think that actually really has helped in the end.
Yeah, no doubt about it, especially when you can relate the fight, and as you said, the battle for equality, which I think resonates different with people than just we play this nice sport that we'd love to have other people see, that a lot of sports go through now. Current women's water polo, the Tokyo Olympics postponed, but going to be next summer. The first now to see women's water polo go from 8 teams to 10 teams, still not equal to the men of 12 teams. Roster sizes have been manipulated. I gather, like me, you'd like to see equal there, 12 and 12 in the competition. Is there anything else in water polo that deserves its own fight right now when it comes to women's water polo? Not asking you to crash any meetings, but is there something else that could use a boost for women's water polo these days?
Yeah, definitely we do need to see absolute equality in the number of teams and players in the water. That hopefully that will change. There's always hope. Probably the one thing I'd like to see is more female coaches, particularly here in Australia. We have some wonderful female coaches at the grassroots level doing wonderful things. I mean, I coach help coach my 14-year-old daughter's team, but it would be great to see more female coaches in the sort of at the Australian level. And there are a few there, but I think we need more support for female coaches, because it's a tricky thing to do when you have a family. And the wonderful women there there at the moment. They don't have their own children. So they're free to coach. They're free to get up early and travel and commit to a team, because it's a massive commitment. So I think what I would love to see is more support, and I'm not sure in what form that support is. But yeah, just more support for women to actually go on and succeed in a major coaching role within Australia.
Excellent. And that's something I think that water polo around the country, or not around the country, around the world could benefit from as well. Just more women coaches.
I think so, because we're missing a whole heap of talent. You know, the ones that are coaching at that high level are fantastic, but there's stacks of other women too who have so much knowledge and so much to give, but they don't have the time or the support to then go on and do that.
No, look, this is a thing in the U.S. as well, right? The proportions are off, right? For the amount of men that play to men coaches is not the same as the amount of women who play to women's coaches, right? There are so many women that have played that could be good coaches. We just often don't get the chance to see it, or they don't get the opportunity. So you bring up a really important point there. Just as we kind of wrap up here, and this has been such a great talk. I love to hear your experience and your stories and your thoughts on all of this. As we close out, anything else that you wanted to kind of hit on here as you think back on your role in this, as you described it, really a fairy tale that came to an ending with a gold medal in Sydney? Is there anything else that comes to mind as we're talking about what was such a important, special part of your life?
I think I just feel so grateful so grateful for all the work that all the women did before us and all the players. I mean, the goalkeeper that came before me, Karen Wade, taught me everything I ever knew about goalkeeping, and yet I then went on to kick her out of the Australian team. So, and Karen was fighting to get women's water polo into the games. You know, her father made the banners, and then Karen actually didn't get to represent Australia at the Olympics. So I just feel very grateful for all the women that were the trailblazers in water polo, women's water polo, not just in that Olympic movement that came before us, and just so grateful for all of them, and so grateful for the opportunity. The Olympics and water polo has really enriched my life, and I learned so many things that, you know, I carry over into my everyday life. And I'm just so very thankful to have had the sport and the travel and the friendships and the teammates and the camaraderie. It's just very grateful.
Excellent. A fitting way to end, talking about gratitude, and to echo your point, a shout out to all the women that played in the late 70s and through the 80s and early 90s that had wonderful careers that didn't get to include the Olympic Games until that fight resulted in 2000 being the first. Liz, this is a pleasure once again. Thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your experiences.
Anytime, Greg. Thank you for having me.